Bama week is here. What else do we have to say? It's Locked on LSU. Let's go.
You are Locked on LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
Okay, let's get it. It is Locked on LSU, your team every day. I'm your host, Matt Moscona. Thanks so much for making us your first listen. We are free, available wherever you get podcasts, of course, on YouTube as well. So please subscribe. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. It is LSU-Alabama week, but oddly, because LSU's coming off the bye, we don't have our typical show to start the week. There's actually a lot of other stuff going on. Kim Mulkey landed a 5-star, which I'd like to talk about. And the LSU baseball team had a fall scrimmage against Samford, so I'll get you some tidbits there. But I understand, y'all. It is LSU. It is Alabama. It is everything on the line for these two teams. Saturday's game in Tiger Stadium is a de facto college football playoff elimination game. Remember how these two teams got to the point where they are. Of course, LSU lost the season opener, as we well know, against Southern Cal, a Southern Cal team that is now 4-5 on the season. So that loss just keeps looking worse. But the Tigers kind of fumbled and bumbled their way through September. They beat Nichols. They got down 17 to South Carolina, but rallied to win 36-33. Remember, Carolina had a shot to tie it on a field goal at the gun, which they missed. That win's looking better and better. Then LSU sort of played with its food in the first half against UCLA before routing them 34-17. They finally hit their stride against South Alabama 42-10 before hitting that first open date and having a marquee win in overtime against Ole Miss. Looked like the Tigers were really improving when they went up to Arkansas and blasted the Hogs 34-10, only to fall a week later at Texas A&M 38-23. And we all know the story there, where LSU couldn't stop Marcel Reed once Texas A&M inserted him. Now, coming off the bye, they'll take on an Alabama team, which is also at 6-2. The big difference between the two teams, though, right now, Alabama has 2 conference losses, whereas LSU has just 1. So Bama trying to win out, but even if they do, it is unlikely Bama finds its way to the SEC championship game because of those 2 losses. It is more than likely that you're going to have a couple of 1-loss SEC teams playing in Atlanta for the SEC championship. But certainly you can still earn a trip to the college football playoff without playing in the conference championship game. That's what Alabama is trying to do. LSU, meanwhile, controls its own destiny to a certain degree, barring something unforeseen. But if LSU were to win out and go 10-2, 7-1 in the league, the strength of record in the conference should be good enough to get LSU to Atlanta. Now, we can have a debate over whether or not LSU wants to be in Atlanta, because as a 10-2 football team, if you go to the SEC championship game and lose and now have a 3rd loss, would you be effectively eliminated from college football playoff contention? Flip side of it is, if you're 10-2 and you go to the SEC championship game and win, you get a bye. You get a top 4 seed and a bye in the college football playoff. So a lot to play for. Alabama, of course, we know how they've gotten to this point as well. Opened up their season by routing Western Kentucky 63-0. They played South Florida, and you can look at that score at 42-16 and think, man, they rolled over South Florida. But as it were, it was a 28-point fourth quarter for Alabama. That game was a 28-16 game. I'm sorry, it was a 21-16 game with 6 minutes to play. I mean, Alabama had a 5-point lead with 6 minutes to play, and in the final 5:50, they scored 3 times. So it went very badly for South Florida late. But that was a very close ball game. After routing Wisconsin at Camp Randall 42-10, they played Georgia in the game that we all remember. So many people focused on the first half, not the second half, where Georgia overcame a 28-point deficit, and it bit Alabama. A week later, they went to Vanderbilt and lost. They played South Carolina and had to survive an onside kick late, a game where they were out-coached in that ball game and quite honestly were fortunate to win. They went up to Knoxville and lost 24-17. And then 2 Saturdays ago, beat Missouri 34-0. But of course, the caveat there is Brady Cook left that game and Drew Pine played for Missouri. So in some respects, a get-right game for Alabama. But really, how good is this team? Again, both of these teams are playing effectively for their college football playoff live Saturday in Tiger Stadium. The loser, for all intents and purposes, is eliminated. The winner still very much alive. And we know what LSU has ahead after the Alabama game. They'll go to Florida, then home against Vandy in Oklahoma. As for Alabama, after LSU, they play Mercer. They're at Oklahoma, which has been just really bad this year. Just 3-6 overall, 1-5 in the league. And then the Iron Bowl in that game is in Tuscaloosa this year against Hugh Freeze's Auburn squad. Now, a couple of things when you look at LSU and Alabama, you could look at the big picture, the scoring. Alabama 19th in scoring offense, 19th in scoring defense. But when you look at some of the context I just gave you, they shut out Western Kentucky. They shut out Missouri without Brady Cook. Those clearly dramatically alter those percentages. LSU 26th in scoring offense, 54th in scoring defense. But the difference between LSU and Bama is 3 points in scoring defense. Alabama allows just under 19 points per game. LSU allows 22 points per game. So about a field goal difference in scoring defense for LSU and Alabama. Here's one thing to consider. There's a lot to consider. Alabama, as we've told you, 129th in the country in penalties. There are only 4 teams in all of college football that commit more penalties than Alabama. If Alabama comes to Tiger Stadium and does what they did against Tennessee, it is going to be very hard for Alabama to come and win. In that game on Rocky Top, Bama was penalized 15 times for 115 yards. Again, only 4 teams in college football commit more penalties than Alabama. So you look at that and the fact that while Alabama is 6-2, their 2 losses are both road conference losses. They lost at Vanderbilt and at Tennessee. By the way, the only 2 games in conference that Bama has played on the road, at Vanderbilt, at Tennessee. Now they have to play at LSU, and as we mentioned, they will go to Oklahoma as well. But I'm very big on situations. We talk about it all the time. Not just who you play, but when and where you play them. And so far, Kalen DeBoer's team has not shown that they are able to go on the road in the conference and handle going on the road in the conference. And the environment at Vanderbilt wasn't great. I mean, you're playing at a construction site, but still, that was the week after their Georgia win, and they did not handle the prosperity there. And they went on the road and gave up 40 points to Vanderbilt in a game that was not a fluke, that Vanderbilt led wire to wire and was the better team over those 60 minutes. And then, of course, against Tennessee, another game where, my goodness, Tennessee had opportunities to blow that game wide open. Nico Iamaleava missed some open receivers on deep balls. But Alabama couldn't get going offensively in that game, and Tennessee beat them 24-17. Now, Tennessee's defensive front's a lot better than LSU's, talent-wise, scheme, everything. But it's also a situation where you look at what defenses have done against Alabama since that Georgia game. In particular, how they've defended Jalen Milroe. They've made Jalen Milroe into a passer, and that is going to be the key for LSU. When you look at Jalen Milroe's game log, he had the big day on the ground against Georgia. 16 rushes for 117 and 2 scores. What's happened since then? Vanderbilt, 7 carries for 10 yards. South Carolina, 18 carries for 36 yards. Tennessee, 14 carries for 11 yards. And then Missouri, 11 carries for 50 yards. If LSU can turn in a performance like any of those 4 that I just mentioned, the Tigers will be celebrating Saturday night in Tiger Stadium. Remember, it was Jalen Milroe's feet that beat you in Tuscaloosa a year ago when he ran for 4 touchdowns. Can LSU turn in a defensive performance more similarly to what we saw against Talon Green in Arkansas? Or will it look more like what Marcel Reed did when LSU went to Texas A&M? We'll find out in just a few short days. We'll be counting you down to LSU and Alabama all week here on Locked On LSU. As I mentioned, I do have a few tidbits on both baseball and women's basketball. It's Alabama week. I can't believe I have baseball and women's basketball on the docket, but we do. So let's get to it. It's Locked On LSU, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel, get ready to tackle all the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. I know. It's LSU-Alabama week. I know. And it is so hard to justify talking about anything other than LSU-Alabama during LSU-Alabama week. However, we've been doing that all last week. We got plenty more to talk about this week. But I wanted to quickly mention the LSU Baseball Tigers, because LSU, something the NCAA allowed a couple of years ago, are inter-squad scrimmages in the fall, whereby instead of just playing an intra-squad where you're playing against each other, you could play another team in an exhibition. And so LSU went to Biloxi on Sunday, and they played 3 7-inning games against Samford. And Tigers rolled by a combined 20-6 over 21 innings. Beautiful, by the way, at the Biloxi Shuckers Park right there on the Gulf. Gorgeous place if you've never been, just right in the shadows of the Beau Rivage. But LSU won the first scrimmage 4-3, 7-2 in the second one, and then 9-1 in the third game. Tigers do play against ULL this coming weekend for its second and final exhibition weekend. A couple things to keep in mind. LSU does have 26 new players. So when you have that many new players, this is an invaluable opportunity to be able to go away from home and to play against somebody else to see how things all come together. A few things that, and I was not there, so I'm relying on the release and the information, the stats that we got from LSU out of these scrimmages. A few things that stood out. Number one, in the first game, Chase Shores pitched for LSU and went 3 1/3. Remember, Chase Shores 2 years ago as a freshman had become a part of LSU's weekend rotation. He's the big 6'7" righty who throws 100. Had Tommy John missed all of last year, had LSU advanced further in the postseason, word was Chase Shores would have pitched. But this is a guy who is your Friday night guy. If it goes any other way than Chase Shores being your Friday night guy, you're in great shape, because that means somebody is pitching like a first-round pick, because that's what Chase Shores is. He's a big righty who throws 100. So Chase Shores went 3 1/3, limited Samford to just 1 run on 1 hit with 1 walk, and struck out 5. Again, struck out 5 in 3 1/3. So fantastic to see Chase Shores get on the bump and pitch well. In that game, Luis Hernandez, a transfer from Indiana State, had a run-scoring single in the first and an RBI ground out in the third, which scored Derek Curiel. Remember, Curiel is the guy from California, left fielder, who perfect game rated as the number 10 overall prospect in America. So Curiel getting looks at there with the starters out in left field, which is fantastic to see. That could be a guy that's a solution out there in the outfield. Of course, Ashton Larson's going to be one of your starters, and very likely Josh Pearson as well. But in left, looks like Curiel got a look there. Also interesting to see some of the other names. Dalton Beck, one of your transfers, had an RBI single. Ashton Larson had a sacrifice fly. We know Larson finished so strong last year. You had an RBI double by outfielder Mick Paul. So when you play 21 innings, you have a lot of guys that are going to play. Josh Pearson was hit by a pitch with the bases loaded. Shocker. And then Trevor Schmidt, the transfer. Remember, Trevor Schmidt's a guy, you'll learn all these names again. I'm not trying to overwhelm you, but Trevor Schmidt's a guy that Jay Johnson recruited to Arizona, and is big bopper, big bat on the infield, DH first base guy. And Schmidt never played for Jay Johnson because he took the LSU job before he ever coached at Arizona. Well, Schmidt transferred to Fullerton Community College, not Cal State Fullerton, but Fullerton Community College, Fullerton College, and played there and now has come to LSU. And that's another big bat that potentially is in the middle of your lineup. What I thought was maybe the other thing that was most encouraging outside of seeing Chase Shores pitch game one and pitch so well is that in game three true freshmen pitched. Maverick Rizzi, Cooper Williams, and William Schmidt. William Schmidt is the guy who thrilled Jay Johnson and LSU fans the week of the draft when he announced that he was coming to school at LSU. Schmidt prepped at Catholic High in Baton Rouge, top right-handed pitcher out of high school in the draft, in this most recent draft, and decided to forego the draft and sign with LSU. Diehard LSU fan, lifelong LSU fan, and a guy that is a future day one, first round draft pick type guy, and is a weekend rotation guy potentially as a freshman. Well, Schmidt pitched 3 scoreless innings in his first outing. So to see Schmidt go out there first time against collegiate hitters and shove the way he did is really encouraging. I get it, Samford. It's not a Friday night in the SEC on the road in conference play, but that's a guy who you are fully expecting to count on this year. There's no shortage of arms for Jay Johnson at all. Having Chase Shores back, adding William Schmidt, the work you did in the portal this year, adding guys like Anthony Ianson, Zach Cohen out of Wofford. I mean, you have got a ton of arms. So it's going to be sort of an embarrassment of riches as far as the depth of this pitching staff. And it was good to see a lot of those guys get work, and early reports are good from the scrimmage. So as we mentioned, LSU, 3 7-inning games, 21 innings of baseball against Samford. Tigers blasted Samford. Now, next weekend, the Tigers will be in Lafayette at Teague-Moore to take on the Cajuns. I have a feeling the day after LSU plays Bama in football, probably won't be a ton of people on Sunday over at Teague-Moore, but who knows? Maybe you'll make the trek down I-10. Maybe it depends on how it goes Saturday night in Tiger Stadium. All right, it is Locked on LSU, your team every day. One other quick note as we bounce around a little bit here. I do have a thought on College Game Day and who the guest picker might be. I'll get to that in just a quick second. And a giant get for Kim Mulkey. That's coming up next. It's Locked on LSU, your team every day. Okay, y'all, it's game week. So it's time to get to game time. LSU and Alabama. If you want to be in Tiger Stadium on Saturday night, you better download the Game Time app. It is the best ticketing marketplace that I've personally ever used. And yes, if it's sports, great. If it's concerts, wonderful. Comedy, theater, you want to be at a live event, you want Game Time. I love the all-in pricing. Told you about this feature all the time. You have to turn it on. But when you toggle, it'll show the total price up front, so there's no surprise fees at checkout. I love the seat views. You get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy, and they have the lowest price guarantee, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. It's all at Game Time. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem with the code LOCKEDONCollege. That's LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. So LSU and Alabama this week in Tiger Stadium. We know College Game Day will be there. A lot of people are going to opine who the guest picker might be. One thing to keep an eye on is a lot of times you have NFL alums that are on their bye week with their current team come in for those games. And it may not work, but it is worth noting that this week on Thursday Night Football, the Cincinnati Bengals play the Baltimore Ravens. So, well, it's not a full bye. It's a mini bye, and the Bengals don't play on Sunday. So maybe, just maybe, one or two former LSU alums who currently play on the Cincinnati Bengals might be able to make their way to Baton Rouge for this one. Of course, Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase are who we're talking about. You know that. But the Bengals play the Ravens on Thursday. So in theory, after Thursday Night Football, those guys could be in Baton Rouge, and maybe, just maybe, Joe Burrow could be the celebrity guest picker for College Game Day. Can you imagine how unglued a scene that would be if Joe Burrow is back in Baton Rouge for a game? He is deified, regardless of the struggles the Bengals are having this year, man. You have Joe Burrow show up for an LSU-Alabama game in Tiger Stadium. Suffice to say, it might be pretty lit. We'll see how it all goes as the week passes along. Hey, one other quick note here before we wrap up the show today. Kim Mulkey so by the way, the year 4, hard to believe it's year 4, but year 4 of the Kim Mulkey era tips off on Monday. The 7th ranked LSU women's basketball team will take on Eastern Kentucky on Monday at the Maravich Center. But on the eve of tip-off of the season, Kim Mulkey landed a major prospect, 5-star Zakiya Johnson, committed to LSU. Now, Zakiya Johnson is a 5-star, one of the top 5 players in the country, depending on which scouting service you look at. On3, for example, rates her as the 4th best player in the country and the number 1 shooting guard in the country. So number 4 overall, the number 1 shooting guard. She's out of Shelbyville, Kentucky. She had offers from Louisville and Kentucky, but decided to pass on the in-state schools and ultimately decided to land with Kim Mulkey and the LSU Tigers. I love this quote from Johnson. She told On3. I'm sorry, forgive me. I was looking for the quote and I can't find it. My apologies. She talked about effectively the culture with Kim Mulkey and why she wanted to be at LSU. And it was the culture that Kim Mulkey had built and is building at LSU. And you'd love to hear that. When you start to look at this LSU class, for this current signing class, the only class in the nation with 3 top 25 commits. Bella Hines and Divine Barrage are already in the class. Hines is the number 24 overall player, and Barrage is the number 7 overall player. So right now, LSU has committed, Kim Mulkey has committed the number 4, number 7, and number 24 overall players in the country. Look, I understand that we're smack dab in the middle of football season. LSU is about to play Alabama, and here I am telling you about LSU baseball and women's basketball. And those may not be the things that are front and center in your mind, and I understand that fully. But when you sometimes get stories like this, it's worth talking about. Yes, when we move through the winter and then ultimately the spring, Kim Mulkey's team is going to be expected to be competing for championships. And clearly with a class like this she's putting together, if you had the fear that maybe after Angel Reese left, Haley Van Lith experiment didn't go awesome last year. This will likely be Flage's last season with the women's basketball team as well. Reinforcements and high-level reinforcements are on the way for Kim Mulkey and the LSU women's basketball team. But in the meantime, y'all, it's LSU and Alabama this week in Tiger Stadium. On Monday, Brian Kelly will meet with reporters to kind of give an update on how the bye week went. Some of the storylines I'll tell you that I'll be keeping an eye on this week. Definitely interested in Garrett Dellinger's injury to see if the LSU starting left guard will be available for the game on Saturday. If not, Paul Mabinga would go. When you're looking at injury situations, West Weeks is another one worth keeping an eye on. You know, the linebacker was dressed against Texas A&M but didn't play. So are they trying to redshirt him? And if so, are you really going to rely on a couple of freshmen after your first 2 guys in Whit Weeks and Greg Penn? Potentially Devon Keys, Xavier Atkins become even bigger parts of this LSU defense through the final month of the regular season. And then, you know, Caden Durham's health after the dislocated toes, and has Garrett Nussmeier purged the bad decisions? You know, when I think back to the Georgia game that Alabama won in Tuscaloosa, it was the turnovers by Georgia, in particular the 3 first-half turnovers, that allowed Alabama to build that big lead. That's going to be such a key for LSU. I don't mean to be cliche and say, well, we got to protect the football and whoever wins the turnover battle. But it's true. When you look at Alabama and when they've struggled, that's been part of it. It's been the turnover battle. and it's been penalties and self-inflicted wounds. For what it's worth, Alabama is +7 on the season. LSU's +2 on the season in the turnover margin. So, look, over the course of this week, we are going to dissect and peel back every layer of the onion that you can imagine about this football game. And we need to, because there's a ton on the line. As we mentioned as we started, de facto college football playoff elimination game. Winner keeps their playoff hopes alive. Loser, you're hoping to top out somewhere maybe like the Citrus Bowl. We'll be talking about it all week right here on Locked On LSU. Hey, now that we're done, thanks for making us your first listen. Jump on over to Locked On SEC. Our guy, Chris Gordy, LSU alum. You can find Locked On SEC on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you're on podcasts, please subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Rate us, leave a review. If you're on YouTube, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you're notified whenever we post a new video. And let a friend know if they love the Tigers. We got you every single day for Locked On LSU, your team every day.